In the last decade, violent crime all over Britain has been rising.
There's a 23-year-old male.
With murder, stabbings and gun crime at record levels. The public wants something done, but how do we get it under control? My name is Chris Daw QC, and I'm a barrister who defends those accused of committing serious crime.
And I'm Ayesha Nayyar, a solicitor who represents victims of crime. Chris and I both have very different views on how to solve this crisis. The criminal justice system needs to get tough, and it needs to get tough fast.
I, on the other hand, think Ayesha has got it all wrong.
The get tough on crime approach to criminal justice is a myth. It doesn't work. We're doing that now. What we need is different answers. I'm going to show you what they are.
In this series, we will both be trying to convince you which of us has the stronger case. By hearing from the victims.
I'm still struggling daily, I'm still going to hospital, whereas he's done his time and expects a normal life.
Spending time with professionals on the front line.
The last thing that we want to do is be telling a loved one that, you know, their family member, son, daughter, husband, wife, brother, sister, isn't coming home tonight.
And even meeting reformed criminals who have committed serious crime.
Nice to meet you. Same here.
You have to be prepared for violence at all time. I was always prepared because, obviously, the life that I lived.
At the end of the week, we'll be putting our cases to a specially assembled jury.
What can we do as a collective to make things better?
Who will be asked to deliver a verdict on a question that matters to us all. Crime, are we tough enough? All week, Ayesha and I have been on the road, meeting witnesses and hearing testimony from the front line of the criminal justice system.
But today, it's time to take things back to the courtroom as we sum up our cases to a special jury.
The longer we lock them up for, the more we lock them up, the more crimes they come out to commit.
Before they deliberate the issues with one another.
The problem is we are creative human beings, and if we can't come up with a solution to help our younger people and change the perspective in London, who roll out the policies, we will never change anything.
And ultimately, deliver a verdict.
First though, with everything still in the balance, we're meeting to discuss how we both feel about the upcoming trial.
So, Chris, we've had a long week and we're now ready to face the jury. How are you feeling?
I think it's going to be difficult for me coming from, you know, the argument that we need to look at crime in a way that isn't just about locking people up, which I think for many people that's the instinctive reaction. It's just, you know, just why have any sympathy for these people? Let's just get tough on them, lock them away and forget about them. What I'm trying to get across to people is that you actually reduce crime by looking at it as a joined up solution rather than just automatically reacting and saying we've just got to lock people up for longer and longer and throw away the key.
Well, if it was the general public that we had as a jury, then I think I'd be in a much stronger position. But we're not in front of the general public, are we? We're in front of 12 people who've experienced the criminal justice system. So it'll be interesting to see which side they land on.
Yeah, and I think some of them are getting, you know, some of the jury have come from one side of the argument and some of them, on the face of it, come from the other. But I really think that there's going to be some common ground somewhere. I do hope that they'll listen to what I have to say about the need to be more, you know, creative, more thoughtful about criminal justice, and you know, if they are, that we can in the end probably come together and agree at least some of the ways forward. I think it is going to be difficult for me to persuade them that, you know, when you look at the evidence and you hear some of the experiences that people have been through, maybe it's just not as simple as that.
You think you're going to lose, don't you?
I don't think I'm going to lose. I think it's going to be really difficult. I think it's going to be tough to persuade, particularly those who come from, you know, an experience of being victims of crime, that they need to perhaps look at things in a different way. Of course, that's going to be difficult. But, you know, I've had tough challenges, and I know you have in your career as well. So, you know, it's game on.
Well, I just hope that we've got a sensible jury with experience of life and crime, and they come to the right conclusion, which is mine.
Well, we'll see.
We've assembled our special jury from a diverse but balanced mix of those whose lives have been affected by crime one way or another, and many of whose stories we've heard throughout the week.
There's Darryl Laycock, the reformed gang leader.
Also here, we have Pauline Leacherwood and Adele Bellis, two survivors of violent crime.
And we've also invited people who have an important contribution to the law and order debate. Dr. Martin Glynn, a criminologist, former police officer Norman Brennan.
Chris and I will be taking it in turns to sum up our cases based on the evidence we've gathered during the week. And I'm first to address the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear from some of the victims and people I've spoken to over the course of this series. This week, I've travelled all around the country, listening to testimony that's literally brought a tear to my eye, and hearing things that have almost left me speechless. What kind of questions are you asked by the children?
Sadly, I've been asked, where's a safe place to stab?
I've also seen things that have scared me and made me angry. But my main objective has been to give a voice to victims, to those who often find themselves let down by the criminal justice system after they've gone through the worst experience of their lives. There was the story of Adele Bellis, not only horrifically scarred in a brutal acid attack, but then let down by her experience of a court system that treated her like a criminal.
I'd got a date or a time wrong and, you know, they were picking it up, going to the jury, Miss Bellis is lying, you can't get the times wrong, calling me a liar.
You've had acid thrown on the side of your face and you've got these horrendous bits, and you were called a liar at that trial?
Yeah.
And then her attacker is out, free to roam the streets.
Why would I want to, you know, go to town and potentially bump into the person that's ruined my life or, you know, changed my life?
We've also met the victims of knife crime, families like the Hooligans, whose son was killed by a repeat offender who'd been let out on licence.
There was an altercation outside with a girl. So Michael and a few lads come out and he said, "What are you doing? You don't hit women." And as Michael thought he was punching him, he was stabbing him.
They told us they want the system to crack down hard before it happens again.
I think the probation are told not to recall them because the prisons are full. And my answer to it is build more prisons because you can't have these people on the street.
His family feel they didn't get justice.
The system's just let this lad do what he wants. Put him in for a bit, let him out, and it's wrong. It's totally wrong because they're not the ones that's living without their baby son and their brother, and it's horrible. And we've got to live like that forever.
But I've also wanted to give a voice to those professionals who are fighting day in and day out to keep the public safe, whether it's those making sure drugs are kept off our streets or patrolling the neighbourhood, checking up on the residents. And talking to them, it's clear that things are getting worse. Remember what Sergeant Walker and PC Smith, who patrol the streets of Manchester, said?
It's got its challenges. As you can see, it's the heavy footfall, massive diverse area. Recently, you've had quite a few murders where young lads have lost their lives due to knife crime.
I've seen with my own eyes that stop and search works, taking deadly weapons off our streets and putting them under lock and key. When you stop people on the street, do they think it's acceptable or legal to carry weapons like this?
They do, believe it or not. When we speak to people in an interview, they think they can legitimately carry an item like that on them. They don't realise it's against the law.
And I've been convinced that we need to give the police whatever resources they need to get the job done. And if that means more tasers, then so be it.
A lot of the times we come to people where they're not listening to reason, and unfortunately we are having to use our taser, CS spray and our batons as well.
But it was perhaps the words of one former police officer that really produced some of the most powerful evidence of the week, Norman Brennan.
I have a passion about right and wrong. I have a passion about Britain being the best country in the world as far as law and order is concerned, but I'm ashamed to say that we've lost the streets.
Norman's view is that the courts have got to get tough by handing out longer sentences, and I agree.
I personally, and I know tens of thousands of my serving colleagues within policing and retired, believe that the CPS are more interested than saving money than actually ensuring justice is done.
Despite all this, I have altered my hardline views in some ways. I went to Alt Course Prison and saw the efforts being made to make inmates better fathers and role models to their children. What's the ultimate aim? What are you trying to achieve when these lads go back out there?
Whilst they're with us, we're giving them time to think about not only what they've done, the reflection of what they've done and the impact it's had on other people. And ultimately, hopefully they'll take that on board, and when they leave us and go through the rest of the process, it'll stop them from reoffending.
I listened to Melanie Woolcock's story, whose experience of wrongful imprisonment teaches us that we can't just lock people up and throw away the key.
I did not commit a crime. I shouldn't have been in there.
Wrong.
And seeing the hard work of people like Ken Hines, it's clear that policing works best with the help of the community.
It led to me setting up this group called Harringay Independent Stop and Search Monitoring Group. And what it is just to really, because what I realised, where the biggest issue was with the police is on the engagement.
However, there are some things I just can't agree with Chris on. I believe that prison needs to be primarily about punishment. Only then can we make sure it's a deterrent. That's the big football pitch. Who plays there?
Prisoners from different units, so they have their own gym time. Some of that gym time, maybe that they work in the actual sports centre themselves.
Next, legalising drugs. Despite what former undercover cop Neil Wood said, that's a red line for me.
We allow adult choice and regulate that choice to protect our children. That's what I'm talking about. We need to protect. Drug dealers are selling cannabis to 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds because the market is ubiquitous. It's everywhere.
But then I defy you to go to any parent and say, at the age of 18, your child can pop along to their doctor and pick up a heroin prescription. And finally, I remain convinced that victims are not being listened to enough. That needs to change.
And there was no attempt to sort of separate them from you or to have any sensitivity to how that might impact on you at all?
No, not at all. So my answer to the question, crime, are we tough enough? I say no. And we need to be before it's too late. In conclusion, enough is enough. Sentences should fit the crime. Porridge should mean porridge.
With Ayesha having closed her case, it's now my turn to address the jury.
Everything Ayesha says sounds good, but almost everything she says is wrong. So rather than listening to me talking about it, here are some of the people that I've had the good fortune to meet and listen to over the last week, along with some that Ayesha's spoken to as well.
In my 25 years as a criminal defence barrister, I've seen a lot of crime and spoken to a lot of criminals.
Members of the jury.
But this week I went outside my usual comfort zone.
To think that you see a child grow up and it's just... Sorry.
And I fully admit that this has involved some very revealing interviews with victims of crime who've told me how they feel they were let down by the system.
So if you get caught with a knife, it should be put away, and it'll stop people from carrying knives. If you did that, like put people away for carrying knives, it'll stop a lot of people from going out with a knife, you know what I mean?
But if we're to stop this endless cycle of violence creating new victims, then we also need to listen to those who have been committing the crimes and ask why and what we can do to stop it. When I spoke to the lads in Polmont Young Offenders Institute, I got some answers.
Can you give us an idea of what your life was like before you came into Polmont? I guess some people are lucky when they're growing up. They have, mum, dad, they are, very much kind of like people saying, go to school, do this, do that. Did you have that kind of support when you were growing up?
No, I didn't, but I can't really use that as an excuse.
Yes, they've done horrendous things, but they all seem to come from similar backgrounds.
Why are you here? How long have you been here?
Been in here for about 2 years now.
Right.
So.
And when you came in, how old were you?
16.
Before you went into the secure unit, before you came here, had you done any education? Had you done anything like we've seen here in this centre?
Primary school.
Primary school?
Aye.
So you bombed out of school pretty early on?
Aye.
I'm convinced that locking young men up like this for longer and longer is a surefire way of turning them into hardened criminals. And the reason I know this is because I spoke to someone who's seen it for himself, Darryl Laycock.
People are going to go on and commit more crime, because they're not giving anybody any employment experience, employment training or anything to get a job when they come out. I think most people are set to fail when they're in jail.
For him, prison needs to serve a purpose, not just to punish people, but to rehabilitate them too.
People ain't given a chance and the opportunity to change, not giving no education or training, but what stopped me was tragedy in my family.
If we can intervene, then lives can be changed, and I saw that for myself when I went to Scotland to talk to Callum. The Violence Reduction Unit gave him a second chance, and he's making the most of it.
I make no mistake about it. If I wasn't here, I'd be dead. My son would be fatherless.
And this isn't just former prisoners or criminals saying this, it's the law and order professionals too.
The revolving door. People go into prison, serve a sentence, come out and commit further crime. And they're thinking, well, the prison hasn't worked. That isn't the length of the sentence that's the problem. It's the fact that we've not been able to work with the prisoner to stop them offending.
If they're excluded from school, where are they going? Who do they look to in terms of getting a role model?
You can't arrest your way out of a violence problem. You've got to work with other people. The police can't do it themselves.
Not to mention the doctors who have to deal with knife crime on a daily basis.
I don't agree that locking them up because they've made a mistake is the solution. I think we need to look at the roots and try and start treating the roots and giving young children positive role models, people that they can emulate who are really positive and making a difference.
My opponent Ayesha says that porridge should mean porridge. Well, I'm sorry, I want prison to work. And what we saw at Alt Course means that prisoners get a purpose, not just a punishment.
This wing, say the core values are being a family man, so it offers things that other wings don't offer. So when you come on the wing, you'll be invited to a family intervention programme, which is like a 3-week course on learning basic parenting skills. Some lads don't know how to be a dad. I was very selfish on the outside, which has brought me here.
Ayesha says we should crack down on drugs too. Well, former undercover cop Neil Woods himself used to think this until he realised the truth.
When I went into undercover work, I was a real believer in the drug war. I was a proper foot soldier. And I was always very happy to put gangsters in prison. But eventually, after many years, I had to face up to what I was seeing. And that was that it was having no benefit whatsoever and was actually increasing the violence in society.
And finally, Ayesha says we need to give the police the tools to do the job. But at what price? Do we want to be watched 24 hours a day? No, thank you.
Technology is moving at twice the speed of sound, yet legislation and regulation is slow and it hasn't caught up.
So are we tough enough on crime? For me, that's the wrong question. It's not about getting tough and sending more people to prison. It's doing things that actually work. And if you keep doing the same thing over and over but expect different results, then it will never work. Let's get smart about crime. I urge you to back my case.
Locking people up for long periods of time without any attempt to rehabilitate, save for the most dangerous people, just doesn't work. We're doing it already. It's a myth that we are soft on crime. Sentence lengths are longer than they have ever been. On average, they have gone up by 50% since 1993. Only 31% of those in prison have committed a violent offence. The rest are non-violent offenders, and yet we lock them up. And we lock them up with one result. The longer we lock them up for, the more we lock them up, the more crimes they come out to commit and the more victims we have in our society. And that's the reason why I think the suggestion we need to get tougher and tougher, for me, just doesn't add up.
Having both presented our cases to the jury, it's now time for them to do the talking to each other. So they retire to a special room in order to deliberate.
In here, everyone is being given the chance to say what they want to say, but things don't get off to a good start when former cop Norman Brennan decides to speak first.
Today it will be a bun fight, and it will be everybody flexing their muscles, venting their spleen on stop and search, police fitting people up. What we're not going to do is we're not going to find solutions. We're going to do exactly the same as what I have seen.
We've always done.
Okay, I'll let you come in if you...
I'm sorry. You know, one of the things that really makes me cross, I'm an older person, I've lived on this planet a long time, and all I see is the same things all the time. Right. It never changes, simply because you don't want him to be better than you at explaining yourself, or he may have something to say about the way he was treated. The problem is we are creative human beings, and if we can't come up with a solution to help our younger people and change the perspective in London, who roll out the policies, we will never change anything.
It's a fiery and combative opening from Norman and Elizabeth, but with order restored, the group decide to take each element of crime and punishment in turn.
First up, they talk about the causes of crime. And for knife crime survivor Kwarteng Sarfor, people's social background matter, even in the case of the man who attacked him.
I lived in the area that he grew up in. Like, I knew the factors that played to why he done what he done. Like, poverty. I came from a single parent background as well. Like, not having enough resources, not having good role models. I grew up in Tottenham where things are difficult.
Right.
So,
My point.
being aware of that, I was empathetic towards him because I was like, yo, I understand, although you stabbed me, although I could have died, 1 centimeter away from my main artery, I still understand why you have been put in that position.
Criminologist Dr. Martin Glynn is keen to agree with Kwarteng that the causes of crime are deep and complex.
We are society, but what happens is we sometimes divest our responsibility to experts, people who want to moralise about choices that people make. When you're poor, you will rob. That's what history shows. When you are depressed, you may seek a drug to zone out, to suppress those anxiety.
Yeah.
So therefore, in order to get change, any change is driven politically.
However, former gang member and now mentor to young people, Darryl Laycock disagrees. He says he chose to commit crime despite growing up in difficult conditions.
I chose to do wrong. I knew right from wrong. There was no poverty in my house.
Was there anyone in that crazy world that you lived in that may have put a finger on you and said, look, if you go this way instead of that way? Or were you just not influenced?
No, I wasn't influenced.
Showing that even the most unlikely of people can agree, Norman is keen to back up Darryl's point.
The ethos about everything that we should be thinking about is moral fibre, community spirit and respect, not just for law and order, but for each other. Unless we can actually get a grasp of that, we are going to continue to have in these round-robin bun fights where instead of working on solutions, we're all blaming each other. And these kids out there, the other side of what we're discussing, are killing each other day in and day out, and all we do is throw buns at each other.
Community worker Ken Hines, however, thinks we need to stop the blame game.
It takes a village to bring up a youngster. Now, if you don't show any interest in that young person, then they're going to may come back to burn down that village because they don't feel part of that society. This is where we are going very wrong. We're quick to blame the police, as you said. We're quick to blame single parent, as we're doing.
Yeah.
We're quick to blame the government. But what we don't do to see what can we do as an individual, as a collective, to make things better. Simply, the things that we're doing here, like in Community Against Violence, we show that there is solutions by actually going into the very challenging, what they call hotspot areas, and standing there as not in uniform, because that's going to trigger something in the young person, authority. But as individuals.
With Ken having touched on the issue of policing, the group move on to discuss one of the areas Ayesha and I have significant differences on. She thinks we need to give them more powers to stop and search. I have my doubts about allowing the police such unchecked power. Having himself been stopped and searched over 100 times, and now working to help build a bridge between his community and the police, Ken, however, wonders if there might be a middle way.
I think if we broke it down to see where this all stemming from, and usually the first engagement that young people have with the police is around stop and search. Yeah. I am in favour of stop and search, but I'm in favour that you've got to have a community element aspect to it. Yeah. And the police cannot get that through the training when they're training each other. Yeah. They need to bring other grassroots groups in so that we can have that better understanding as to the ill effects that your good intention can have on the situation.
Former undercover policeman Neil Wood agrees, but with one caveat.
The police should be the community and the community should be the police, as Robert Peel said. But the problem is most stop and search is not for knives. Most of it is not to do with the violence. It's about drugs. Most stop and search is for drugs. And we have to separate drug policy from the rest of these crime issues that we're talking
That's
about.
right. Mm.
And you know, the racial disparity, which is in stop and search, is undeniable. That's about drug policy, because drug policy and racial justice are inseparable.
Norman, however, thinks it's a lot simpler than that. It's just about the number of police on the streets.
Over the last 50, 60 years, there was the community Bobby, and everybody knew him and everybody knew her. They've been taken off the streets. The thing when you actually knew them is that we didn't care whether you were black, white, gay, lesbian, whatever. You were part of the community. And because we were your friend, you actually confided in us. Take tens of thousands of those community bobbies out of villages, towns and cities, you've got what is commonly known as a free-for-all. You've got people that think that they can commit crime at will, children stabbing each other. Children, 40 years ago, a child stabbing another person, it would be headline news. Today, unless there's nothing a bit more important in the national headlines, you will never hear of that. And as I said, the reality is that there's no community policing. We've lost moral fibre, we've lost respect for law and order, and sadly, the community spirit has gone missing.
Britain's courts are the next topic of conversation, and in particular, sentencing. In our summing up, it's clear that this is also an area Chris and I fundamentally part ways on. I want to see stiffer sentences for crime. He thinks we've tried that and it doesn't work. Acid attack survivor Adele is adamant that we are too lenient and too ready to find excuses for those who commit crime.
My ex-partner who conspired my attack, he was a reoffender, in and out of prison, he'd had a bad childhood, his mum committed suicide, there was drugs, everything like that. And, you know, he's a reoffender and he needs a long sentence, all what I've gone through. It's a life sentence for me, it struggles every day. It's not only me, it's my family, it's a repercussion of everything, the community. And I think that he needs a long sentence and to lock away the key, basically.
I don't think sentencing will scare people, it won't put people off. As you know, I was a gang member, I was willing to kill, maim and do whatever. And as long as I survived, that was all that matters. I was willing to go to jail for the rest of my life as long as I lived. I was willing to kill people. It was wrong of me, now I see that it was wrong of me. But jail didn't scare me. Jail did not scare me whatsoever. And I went to jail when it was jail. I went to jail at 17 when you was given a jug. There was no toilets. There was no TV. You was given a jug and you had to do number ones and number twos in this jug. And you was banged up for 23 hours a day. I spent over 12 years in 19 different jails. I've been to every solitary confinement in every jail. I've been a Cat A prisoner numerous times. When I was released from jail, I was the most dangerous person in the Northwest. And it didn't scare me.
The role of prison is the final issue the group discuss. During our week, both Ayesha and I got to visit the kinds of places where inmates are serving long sentences for violent crime. I think we need to move away from punishment and towards rehabilitation.
And while I definitely came to appreciate some of the benefits of this approach after visiting Altcourse Prison, I still fundamentally believe that prison should be a place where punishment is the prime purpose. And Kwartang agrees.
But at the same time, yes, prisons should be hard. It shouldn't be a luxury, because I go on Instagram and I see people making rap music in prison. Exactly. And it baffles me, because that's not how it should be.
No.
Because if you can't have the same freedom that you have outside in prison as well, it should deter you. It should be like, okay, I definitely don't want to go back there again. So whether it is longer years or whether it's much more difficulty, I feel like prison shouldn't be the way it is now. There should be some level of difficulty where the person feels like, okay, if I come out, I value my freedom more than I did when I was in prison.
And Adele agrees too.
My attacker, he got 4 years in prison, out in 2. Like, how is that telling anyone not to do something like that when you're, I'm still getting treatment and he's now out living a normal life?
Law student Gabriella, however, thinks we need to consider rehabilitation more.
Crime is inevitable, unfortunately, to some extent, and in some amount it is inevitable. And I think the way you treat people in prison has a lot to do with the reoffending rates, obviously, and the reoffending rates are something that really I do feel passionate about, because there should be no reason to get this punishment and then go and do it again, because I feel like you don't really get the help in prison. There is some extent of I don't know, education and stuff, but you are just thrown out at the end of it, and there you go and there's no surprise that people and there's no surprise that people go and do what they were going to do before, because you don't get that redirection really.
A lot of people don't get no rehabilitation in jail, but a lot of people when they come out of jail, they hide behind the fact that I've got a criminal record, I can't get a job. But that is a load of codswallop, because for instance, I've been sentenced to so long. I'm not glorifying it because it's a negative thing, but I've turned that into a positive.
It's nearly time for the jury to wind up their conversation. But before they do, one person who's remained quiet throughout the discussions decides to speak. Knife attack victim and street pastor, Pauline.
There's too much blood in the streets. There's too much families crying over their children being lost and killed and murdered and stabbed. There's too much funerals going on. I'm a reverend. I do funerals as well as I do weddings and stuff. And, I deal with young people, adults, all kinds of people, and it's too much going on. It's too much.
Discussions over, the jury returns to the courtroom and deliver their verdict on whose case they are more persuaded by, mine or Chris's.
Before they do, however, they want some points clarified.
The question to the both of you, how can you get tough on crime if certain sections of the community are treated tougher than others? Because I would argue certain communities are treated much tougher than others. And if we're going to get tough on crime, are we equally going to get tough on crime, or are we going to have a disparity in how we define toughness? To both of you.
I think we need to treat everybody equally and fairly, regardless of race, bias or gender. But I also think it's important, and maybe the solution lies in working with the communities that you're talking about. And I know that's not going to be an easy thing to do, but everybody needs to make an active and conscious effort to go in there and work with the communities. I think that's the only way we're going to ensure that equality is across the board.
And one of the things I think that we need to look at is how you get policing in communities by people from those communities, because you wouldn't have the good kids who are going to college getting stopped and searched 3, 4, 6 times a week if the police officers knew who they were and knew that they weren't the kids who were carrying weapons. So I think you have to have local police officers who know their communities in a way that hasn't happened for quite a long time.
Right, Chris, you and I actually met outside Scotland Yard and the law courts, and we had different views. How can anybody in Britain have faith in the sentencing system when it's more like a sale? So although you sort of say quite magnanimously that people are now serving 20 years, in reality they serve 1/5 of their life, yet they have taken somebody else's, and that is why the public are so confused about the sentencing within the criminal justice system.
Listen, let's graft the nettle. The public believe that sentencing is too soft. On the whole, that's the narrative that you read in the newspapers, that's the complaint when anyone commits a crime when they have been released from a prison sentence. The facts are that we're increasing sentences, that people are spending longer in jail, and throughout the time we've been doing that, crime's been going up. My view is it just doesn't work. It doesn't work anywhere in the world. The longer you make the sentences, the worse your crime problem becomes. And so the emotional connection that people have with long sentences, I totally understand, and I respect the experiences of the victims of crime completely, and I understand why. But if you actually want to have fewer victims, then just increasing sentences just doesn't work. And if something doesn't work, my view is don't do it. So that's the answer to your question.
My question to you both is about the media. When children of 16, 15, whatever age group, get connected to the media, they see their heroes in some of the films that's rolled out, and it's all about how the criminals work. It's never about the good guys winning the day. It's always about the opposite. And I don't know whether that fuels the minds of young people when they're being so influenced by something like the media.
Well, I think that social media does have a big role to play in helping keep youngsters on track. We all know of the rise of social media, and it's certainly a platform that a lot of our youngsters are looking to. So yeah, I absolutely agree that social media companies have a responsibility in the same way that everybody else has in making sure the right information is put out there. And if there is glamorization of violence, etc., then that clearly needs to be blocked.
Chris, like you said, it's all about rehabilitation. I totally understand that for petty crime, non-violent crime, I'm totally for that. But as a victim of a serious crime, as a victim, I needed that justice. I needed that sentence in prison for me to feel safe again, for me, my family to feel safe, for the community to feel safe, that he's in prison for a long time.
And I think I respect that point of view, but we have to have a parole system that works, don't we? Because if he remains dangerous after his 12 years, he should stay inside. Absolutely no doubt about it. And you should have the right to know what's going on and to be able to make your views heard through that process, is my belief.
And with that, the talking is over. Each member of our jury has been asked to tell us whether they back my case, which is that we simply aren't tough enough on crime and we need to crack down fast.
Or mine, which is that we need to stop endlessly talking tough and look for answers that treat the causes of crime and rehabilitate those who commit crime back into society. It's verdict time.
Chris.
Ayesha.
Chris.
Ayesha.
Ayesha.
Chris.
With half the jury having delivered their decision, the numbers stand at 3-3. So are we headed for a split verdict? It all comes down to the next 6 votes.
Ayesha.
Chris. Chris. Chris.
Chris.
Chris.
In a dramatic ending, Chris has managed to get votes of 5 of the last 6 jurors, putting the final tally at 8 for him and 4 for me. It seems that this jury has been convinced by his arguments.
But I'm about to reveal that this case has one final twist to deliver yet. We've listened to many of you as we've been around filming around the country, and we've also spoken to each other and spent a lot of time discussing the experiences of very different people that we've spoken to. So we come from a different viewpoint, as you'll have found out watching the films and listening to us talk. But what we've done is come up with this 5-point plan, which we hope, whichever side of the argument that you ended up coming down on in broad terms, that you can agree that these are 5 things that everybody could sign up to. If we're going to tackle Britain's crime crisis, then it's clear we're going to have to bring all sides of the debate together.
That's victims and former prisoners, police and prison officers.
And of course lawyers like Ayesha and me. Our 5-point plan is just a start, but we ask that you consider it carefully. Firstly, it's time to make crime a public health emergency. Tackling crime is bigger than just asking the police and the courts to do it on their own. We have to involve the NHS, housing department, business owners, community organisers, the church. Everyone has a contribution to make, but we need to act now.
Next, we need to establish a victims' council. It's clear that victims don't think they're being listened to when it comes to the criminal justice system. They're often passed over or ignored at a time they are the most vulnerable. So we're suggesting a new organisation that is set up especially for those who need advice, guidance, or a little bit of help.
We have to get to our children early to teach them what crime is, the impact it can have, and what they can do to stay out of trouble. Which is why we think the subject of crime should be put on the national curriculum. This means sending victims, former prisoners and criminal justice professionals into our schools to talk to children and to listen to them.
Following on from the last point, we believe there is a positive role to be played by social media. Too much of it is currently being used as a negative influence on younger people. But rather than banning things, we think it's important we embrace the sort of technology they are using. Let's all become influencers for good and become social media mentors.
And finally, I think we all agree that letting violent and dangerous criminals out on our streets is happening too often, which is why we want to see it become much harder for those who still pose a risk to get out. So the motto needs to be, if in doubt, don't let them out.
By a show of hands, do you think they are the kind of points that you could take back to your communities and the people that you are working with to see if we can make a difference together? So let's have a look at what you think. So that's unanimous. Everybody agrees that those 5 points could make a difference. Thank you. Although Chris might have got the benefit of the initial verdict, we've managed to get a unanimous decision on the joint approach to the big crime question.
One that unites people from very different backgrounds and experiences, and even in the end, Ayesha and me.
All right then, Chris. Congratulations are in order.
Thank
Well
you.
done.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's I don't know about you, but it restores my faith every time I go to court and do a jury trial that juries will listen and they will kind of understand and they'll make decisions based on the evidence. I really think in this, across the week, we've both obviously had the chance to reflect. I don't know about you, but what do you take away from the whole thing?
Well, I still feel like we need to put victims first, and I still believe that the system is broken. But what was really good about today was at the end, despite which way the jury went, we all agreed that we needed a plan of action to take it forward. And the 5-point plan, for me, that works.
It does, and it proves that if you actually get a group of people together and you actually think about things properly, that, we can get away from this cycle of just, it's either this or it's that. It's either get tough or you're too soft. It's not about that. It's about being, realistic and looking at ways that you can actually impact on the streets, reduce crime, reduce the number of victims, and in the end have a better and safer society. And that's what we all want. And I think that's what the 5-point plan in the end is about. We've got to be realistic. We've got to look at how we can actually, in particular, divert the young people away from knife crime, violent crime, before it even gets to the criminal justice system. And that's what public health is about. And I really like to see a bit more about how that works in practice.
It would be amazing if any of the points from the 5-point plan were actually put into action and to see what the result of those would be.
I agree, and some of them, of course, are happening in different ways. We saw some of them in this series. But if we can follow through and look at, exactly what's going on with each of those different areas, maybe we'll actually be able to prove that the 5-point plan worked.
Finally, we'd like to offer our sincere thanks to everyone who's taken the time to be part of this week, especially the police, past and present,
Prison staff and those inmates who agreed to meet us, former prosecutors, and those who gave us access behind the scenes of the most unique locations.
But most of all, we'd like to thank the victims of crime who bravely told us their stories and let us into their lives to talk about some of the most difficult of times.